There are several ways to speed up and slow down layers in After Effects. The simplest is time stretching, and more flexible is time remapping. Let's look at how these work. In the frame rate and frame blending project, go to the police chase car web composition, and let's just do a quick RAM preview to see how this looks. Now, if I want to retime this so that it goes a bit slower, I can use time stretching. If you right-click or control-click on macOS a column header in the timeline panel, you can choose the stretch column. Now we see a stretch value here. But before we stretch time for this layer, we should make sure that our composition is long enough to hold it. So let's change the duration for the composition. Press Control-K or Command-K on macOS to bring up the composition settings dialog box. And here we see that the duration is 5 seconds. Let's go ahead and make this 10. And drag the zoom slider so that we can see the entire composition. There we go. Now, if I click this number in the stretch column, the time stretch dialog box comes up. So let's begin by making the stretch factor 50, meaning that the layer will play back in 50% of its original time. Now, if we do a RAM preview, and let's position the work area so that we're just previewing this segment of the layer. I'll press O to go to the out point of the layer. And then I'll press N to make the work area end at the end of the layer. Pressing N makes the work area end where the current time indicator is. And now if we do a RAM preview, we'll just preview that segment. Notice that the layer now plays back at 50% of the time, and the audio is also playing back in 50% of the time, meaning that it is compressed and pitch shifted. If we instead make the stretch value 200, then the layer will play back at 200% of its original duration. Let's make the work area the entire composition length. One way to do that is to double-click on the center of it. Now, doing a RAM preview, notice that the audio in this case is playing back in twice the amount of time as well, and therefore is pitch shifted to be lower. I'm going to press the page down key a few times so that we can see exactly what's playing on the composition panel. I'll say page down each time that I press the page down button. Page down, page down, page down, page down, page down, page down. Notice that in this default mode, the way that the layer is slowed down causes it to repeat frames. The layer is based on a footage item that was shot at 24 frames per second. So if we're stretching those frames out so that they take twice as much time, but don't change the frame rate of the composition, we have to fill in that missing information somehow. And the default way is simply to repeat frames. If I click Toggle Switches and Modes, we can see the frame blending switch here. I'll turn the frame blending switch on for the layer to its first state, which is frame mix. And I'll also turn frame blending on for the composition. Now, notice what happens as I press page down. Page down, page down, page down, page down, page down, page down. In this case, After Effects is filling in the extra information by mixing or blending the two original frames on either side of the missing frame. This is the lowest quality setting for frame blending. The higher quality setting is referred to as pixel motion. Click this again, and now frame blending is set to pixel motion. So now as I press page down, page down, page down, page down, and then go backward with page up, page up, page up, page up, we see that After Effects is interpolating image information between the missing frames, and it's doing so by analyzing the motion of the image using motion vectors and determining what the image information between the two original frames must be. I'll switch this back to the default of having no frame blending at all, and I'll turn frame blending off for the composition. As you can see, time stretching slows down or speeds up the entire layer. But how can we slow down or speed up just a portion of the layer? For that, we use time remapping. Let's delete this layer so that we can start fresh, and drag the footage item down to the composition. and choose Layer, Time, Enable Time Remapping. Immediately what we see here is that we now have a time remap property and 2 keyframes, one at either end of the layer. And we can drag the layer to extend it to fill the rest of the composition. It's easiest to press the End key to put the current time indicator at the end of the composition, and then press Alt right bracket or Option left bracket on macOS to move the out point of the layer to the current time indicator. And now if I drag this keyframe here to the end and do a RAM preview, we see that we stretch the layer in very much the same way as when we use time stretching. But time remapping is much more flexible. It's often easiest to work with time remapping in the graph editor. I'll click the graph editor button, and here we see our time remapping property. Here's our first keyframe, and here's our last keyframe. If we want to have the layer play at normal speed from 0 seconds to 4 seconds, and then play in slow motion from 4 seconds onward, then we can put a keyframe here, and drag that keyframe upward. So now the layer will play back at a greater speed, as indicated by this greater slope here, until 4 seconds, and then at a lower speed, as indicated by this shallower slope, for the rest of the composition. I'll hit RAM Preview. Now that transition from normal speed to much slower speed was rather abrupt, but we can make this a Bezier keyframe. I'll Alt-click or Option-click on macOS, and now we have Bezier handles. And I'll drag those out a little bit. There. Now we should have a more gradual transition from normal speed to slower speed. You can also use time remapping to make the layer go backward for a while. I'll drag this keyframe down to 0, and here the layer will play back at regular speed, slow down rather abruptly, and then play back in reverse. I'll actually drag this further out in time so that when it plays back in reverse, it plays back more slowly. Let's do that RAM preview. So that's time remapping. With time remapping, you can play layers forward and backward at whatever speed you like, all with great flexibility. With time stretching, on the other hand, you can just speed up or slow down a layer by one amount throughout. And keep in mind that if you need to have After Effects interpolate image information between frames, you can use frame blending, either frame mix or pixel motion.